You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody. Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail dream. Have you ever dreamt of hiking the AT? Bruce Matson did, so we're going to follow him every step of the way. Hi, and as always, welcome back to Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail Dream, sponsored by our very good friends at Trailtopia. Bruce and I have been trying hard to connect a little more regularly, but yet again, neither of us was available when the other was, so there is just the one catch-up again this week. Mind you, it's all about Pennsylvania and the horror that the rocks can wreak upon your boots and your psyche. Interestingly, Bruce's preparations had prepared him so well for Pennsylvania that he was expecting a tough time and he didn't get blindsided. He also invited a friend out to share the experience with him for that awesome climb out of Lehigh Gap and the Knife's Edge. As you're about to hear, Rocksylvania didn't let him or his friend down. Before we hear from Bruce, however, Trailtopia would like to invite you to dinner. Do you remember those cold, wet evenings on the trail? When you pitched up at a shelter and there was nothing you would have rather had than a beautiful, hot, home-cooked meal. Well, apart from actually going home, you could try out one of the delicious meals from Trailtopia. Why not dig into their spectacular jambalaya with its authentic Creole flavour? Or how about their beef stew, which is loaded with beef, potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, corn, green beans and green bell pepper in a fantastic beef gravy. Go on, try them. Trust me, you'll love them. Trailtopia, the best of home cooking away from home. So now, with the miles disappearing all the time, here is Bruce. Okay, we're back with Bruce again. Hi Bruce, how are you?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Steve.
Yeah, we're not seeing each other or speaking to each other as much as we were before. I saw you posted you've got to Delaware Water Gap, which means you've passed out of Pennsylvania. How did you enjoy Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. I think for the most part, I did not enjoy it terribly a lot. I had some good moments. I had reasonably good weather. I had a good buddy come out and hike with me.
Yeah.
I still had good friends on the trail that I would run into and tent with. But, the hiking itself left a fair bit to be desired.
It's tough, isn't it?
Even if you get rid of the rocks, I found the trail to be relatively mundane, not a lot of geologic features to enjoy, not a lot of lookouts, not a lot of points of interest, not historical or cultural markers. So, it had exceptions. Port Clinton was a fun place to visit.
Yes.
But I think an awful lot of my mind and my psyche and my emotions was bound up with a concern about the rocks. And I was very focused on that.
Yeah.
I think fundamentally, ultimately, my management of my fear, my worry was actually a good thing because the rocks, in retrospect, were probably not as difficult as I feared them to be. So because I was ready, I got through them. They weren't pleasant. And I think the last day, so one reason I got a day ahead of my schedule because I decided to do 21 miles and get all the way into Delaware Water Gap. And that involved, I think the worst stretch of rocks in the entire state would be from Wind Gap, really right through Wolf Rocks. There's almost 4 or 5 miles where there really wasn't much break. Oftentimes these rocks will hit you and then you get a break and nice trail and then rock break. But that stretch was really almost completely unrelenting.
And you go around a corner and you think, it must be over any second. And it just isn't, is it? It just goes on and on.
Yeah, it really does. And quite frankly, the day before, we did the climb out of Palmerton, which we can talk about that.
Yes.
But after the climb out of Palmerton, you have this you get seduced into this comfort because there's like these 2 almost complete miles of really smooth earthen pathway.
Yeah,
But
that's
then
beautiful. I loved it there.
Yeah, up through the zinc area. But
Yeah.
then the rest of the day was pretty fearsome. It was on and off, on and off, on and off, but a lot of rocks, a big steep descent through rocks, a big climb through big, large rocks. Tough. Those last 2 or 3 days in Pennsylvania, and you kind of heard that. You were always told, well, it's the second half of Pennsylvania where the rocks are the problem. So I didn't love it. I'm really happy they're over. I did the first section of New Jersey today, and I was told the rocks continue in New Jersey.
That
was somewhat true. Kind of a very, very easy, smooth climb, out of Delaware Water Gap, and then some rocks. I had one of the most just fantastic days I've had out here today. It was the perfect weather, breezy, crystal clear. I must have taken 30 photographs around Sunfish Pond.
Don't you think that is one of the most awesome sights, Sunfish Pond? It was a real surprise to me.
Yeah, and I know it's always going to be this way, but it's always going to be a combination of your mood, the weather, timing, even light. But the way I hit Sunfish Pond today, it's just one of my favorite things I've seen on the whole trail. The whole trail. It was so beautiful.
Was the pond calm?
Yes, there's a little ripple from the breeze, but mostly calm.
Beautiful.
The mountain laurel are blooming, so they're blooming all around the pond. We had sort of perfect blue sky with fair weather clouds. It was just idyllic, I have to say.
Fantastic. Now, you had your buddy out with you. You gave him the Knife's Edge and Lehigh Gap, or the climb up out of Lehigh Gap. Talk us through both of those, because they're certainly 2 major experiences, aren't they?
They really are. And so I think a lot of people know that the Knife Edge is not like the Knife Edge at Mount Katahdin, but it's one of these ridge lines where you have quite a bit of hand over hand, getting good footholds and figuring out different routes through fairly elevated ridge line of rocks and loose rocks and large rocks. And there are overall, I find, and my friend found, the large rocks actually easier than the small rocks because you often can step from one to the one. But the Knife Edge certainly had a few spots where it was dicey, where you were uncomfortable that you could fall. But fortunately, that lasts for 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then it's over. I do think, while a little bit short in duration, the climb down, not up, but down from Bake Oven Knob was just as harrowing as Knife Edge. Very steep, large rocks, and you had to be very careful about how you worked your way down that height as well.
Was that the place where you had to? There was a couple of places you had to jump a couple of feet, didn't you, across from one lock to another? Or was that another climb down?
There's a little bit of that. It's always uncomfortable when I have to leave both feet, and I do it very, very seldom. And sometimes you get on your backside and slide down. But there's been too many people injured out here for me to just not be cautious. So there are times when I've been on all fours, just trying to make, sometimes backing my way down, just finding that foothold or handhold. And that's probably a good segue to the Lehigh Gap.
Well, before you do that, have you had in Pennsylvania, have you had any rain at all to be negotiating these rocks?
So, me, I'm a pretty blessed, lucky guy, but so we have had really good weather, and I have not had to do the rocks in rain until the very last day, which was the day before yesterday. I did that 20 plus.
Right. Well done.
So, going over the Knife Edge or doing the climb out of Lehigh Gap or any of the other places where there's serious rocks, being wet. I have often gone over a few areas of these ridge lines with steep rocks. And I have said out loud to anyone who will listen, I don't know how I could do this in the in the rain. And there was one area, I can't remember right now the name of it, but it was the day before you get to Dragon's Tooth in Virginia. There's a ridge line, and then you come down to a shelter, and then you start to climb up to Audie Murphy's Memorial in Dragon's Tooth. Well, that ridge line, I remember saying that to a friend. I have no idea how you could come across that in the rain. And he and a couple other guys had done it a couple days earlier.
Yeah.
And I said, how did you get through there without falling? And they all fell 3 or 4 times.
Yes.
And I just not sure I can afford to fall once. And
You've had a couple of falls, haven't you? But obviously not bad ones, I presume.
I have. I'm up to 10 falls, and actually,
Not bad.
I fell not in any of these tough rock areas, but coming into Delaware Water Gap 2 days ago, I actually was walking down a makeshift staircase of flat rocks.
Right.
And it was raining and they were wet, but they were level. And I was careful. But when I got my weight on the front of one of those steps, we'll call them,
Wow.
the rock tilted forward, and now it wasn't flat anymore.
Yeah.
And my feet went out from under me. My pole kind of stuck, so my shoulder got wrenched, and I banged my elbow, and I twisted my ankle. But I hiked today, and everything seems to be fine.
Falling at our age is not a good idea, is it? Whichever way you look at it. There's some pretty uncomfortable falls out there. Now, before you actually talk again, I still want you to talk about the Lehigh Gap thing. You also passed the Pinnacle, I think, and there's another rock, a Pulpit Rock as well. Both those are beautiful views, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's Pulpit, there's Pinnacle, there's Dan's Pulpit.
That's right.
And Baked Oven Knob all had very nice views of the Pennsylvania countryside, which is mostly a view of dairy farms. But very, very pretty, a little reminiscent of Western Virginia.
Now, tell us about the climb up. Try to get the listeners, and I give the listeners an understanding, if they haven't ever done it before, that climb up out of Lehigh Gap, how daunting it looks, but how exciting it. Well, I found it really exciting.
Yeah, I think anybody who has followed the AT and watched YouTube videos and read, this is one of the iconic, well-known, scary, places that everyone has to go through.
Sure.
And I, of course, had a friend, and he just picked this time to be with me. So I was very excited that morning because we camped within a mile of the base of the hill. So we did a very quick hike downhill, went across the river, and we're at the base of this very steep looking, it's almost like a scree field, just a mass of boulders that go up seemingly vertical.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we were there at 7 a.m. on a gorgeous, and I'll share some of the photos with you, but a perfectly crisp, clear morning. And we also were excited because it was cool for hiking, and we figured if there were snakes there, they wouldn't be out yet. So, we started up this very, very steep climb, and it takes you up on a pathway initially, and then you get into an exposed area of nothing but, boulders and different rocks, and you have to climb, and use your hands as much as anything.
Don't you think it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle as well? Because you see these you have to find the white blazes, don't you? And they seem to be almost randomly placed, but they are normally the best route for you to take, aren't they?
Yeah, that's a good point. All of a sudden one time we're following them and we're like, oh, they're over there. We got to go over there. But it is. You do have to figure it out, which is the best way. You need to anticipate, ahead 5 or 6 steps, because you need to get to a certain place. But if you go one way, you might be left with a 6-foot climb, which you can't do. But if you go another way, you can do 6 1-foot climbs and get there.
Yeah.
So we put our poles away. My poles I can actually fold up and strap to my pack.
Yeah, sure.
And then I had use of my arms. There was one particularly steep, scary, dangerous spot where I had to be really careful about getting my foothold and then my handhold. And in that same spot, my buddy felt like, 100 days of having a pack on his back, he felt like the weight might pull him back and literally pull him down the mountain. So he passed his pack up to me, up, kind of a ledge where you had to climb and really do some significant of your body, and that went fine. We got his pack up, we got him up, and then there was an area that was, actually pretty easy and fun. A lot of big rocks and just picking your way through and kind of hopping from one to one.
Yeah.
And I would join your club of saying it was less difficult, less scary, and more fun than I thought it was going to be. And in retrospect, I really did have a good time getting through that and accomplishing that climb.
And this is an old Superfund site, isn't it? Because you've then got that beautiful walk through the lovely, nicely packed path. And I remember saying, I did a video of it when I was on the trail, that this was how I imagined the AT would be. A climb like that, climb up the rocks, and then that beautiful, long, flat walk at the top when you're out in the open. I just absolutely loved it there. Didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, like you say, you go into this area of kind of scrub growth, which must be that contaminated area.
Yeah.
And then you go through there, and then you start heading back into the woods, and the rocks start getting back at you.
Yeah. What did your buddy think about it?
Overall, I think he was very sincere in saying he had a great time. It worked him very, very hard.
Yeah.
He, like almost everyone who's come out and hiked with me, has said it was harder than he thought.
Yeah.
Even though I told him he had picked a very tough time. Other than a couple of moments, like a moment or two on the knife edge, a moment or two coming down baked oven knob, and a moment or two during that climb, I would say, he found it to be fun and challenging and not unduly scary. It was hard. He did kind of figure out the difference between the hikers who move quickly through the rocks and the plotters like me. The plotters like me take our time and try to find spots and are successful, 80% of the time.
Yeah.
But the people who go fast, they take on the rocks directly.
Yeah.
The smaller rocks, they just take them on. And the report I get back from those people is, tears their shoes up and their feet are bruised terribly, but they've kept up their pace. And my friend, who at one time took the lead and tried to go at a quicker pace, realized you can't pick your way through the rocks at a accelerated pace.
Yeah.
So when you can't pick your way through, you take the rocks on. And that evening, he said he just had a lot of soreness from the rocks sort of banging through his boots.
How long was he with you?
2.5 days.
All right. So that's enough. And you said actually you went ahead of schedule. Somebody actually did ask this the other day in an email, not a question as such, but are you up to date with your schedule right now or not? Remember you had a schedule. I know you're not worried about it, you're not following it, but I'm sure you look at it from time to time, so you know roughly where you expect it to be on June whatever it is the day that we're recording. Did you know where you were going to be at this date?
I did have a schedule that took me all the way to Katahdin, and I think had me getting there in August 3rd or 4th.
Right.
The first half of the schedule through Harper's Ferry was more informed and more heavily worked.
Right.
The second half needed to be refined more. I've never refined it because, as you may recall, I decided I was going to be less strapped. So when I say I get out of schedule now, it's more of an immediate sort of a short-term schedule.
Right.
So, for instance, the reason I'm a day ahead here is that I have these friends from the Camino who live in Pennsylvania, literally driving over 90 miles to take me to dinner tonight.
Cool.
And I didn't have the heart to say, well, I'm ahead of schedule, I can't do it. So I spent the extra day here, but I didn't want to miss the hiking. So I got shuttled north and just hiked back to my room today.
Oh, right.
And I can't tell you how pleased I am that I did that, because it was I told you, it's one of my favorite days so far on the trail was today.
So where are you staying at now? Are you staying at Delaware Water Gap now?
Yeah, I'm in a little bed and breakfast. It's
Cool.
got a jazz club called the Deer Head Inn.
Nice, very nice too. So
there's not a lot of choices in Delaware Water Gap.
Like a lot of places on the trail rather. Now, I'd never been to New Jersey other than going to Newark. So New Jersey for me was a shock how beautiful it was. I really loved it. There's some great walking along the ridge because you've got some fairly benign hiking coming up, and it's all overlooking New Jersey. So I think you're really going to enjoy that more than perhaps you might have imagined.
Yeah, I got a great intro today. I loved it. I loved the pond, and then I was up on the ridge. And this is, in contrast to Pennsylvania, I had a number of views, both east and west, and much more interesting topography in terms of the way the trail took me kind of around and through some rock outcroppings. And it was just a beautiful trail, and there were rocks. There were plenty of rocks. Maybe I don't think it's bad as Pennsylvania, but I was up there on the ridge. I had beautiful weather. I could see both out to the east, out to the west. I could look down on Sunfish Pond. I could then walk around the pond itself. It was just a great day. I have heard that New Jersey is a pleasant surprise. One of my buddies, who's probably 4 or 5 days ahead of me, has said just that. He goes, "You really are actually going to really enjoy New Jersey."
Yeah, I definitely did. And in fact, I can recall getting past Sunfish Pond and just being blown away by Sunfish Pond, then hitting this lovely ridgeline. As you say, you can see either side. And I remember feeling one day sitting there thinking, man, I'm grateful that I got a chance to do this. It was that particular moment I thought, this is so darn fantastic. I've got through Pennsylvania, which gave me a hard time, I got to tell you. I was up, I'd gone past Sunfish Pond, it was magnificent there, and then this magnificent ridge. I thought, this just is hardly believable that this is going to get better. Yet everybody was telling me that New Hampshire and Maine were going to be just as good, if not better as well. So that was a moment I remember sitting down and thinking, I'm so grateful I got the chance to do this. And I'm sure you get that quite a lot these days as well.
Yeah, well, today was, like your time through that same region. It was just one of those days where everything was perfect. And, I ran into a lot of people. It's almost like a big crowd came out of Delaware Water Gap today. And there must have been, literally in a 30-minute period of time, there must have been 8 or 10 through hikers I knew pretty well.
Cool.
Had all come through this area. When people came and lingered for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, and we just caught up, and everybody was reveling in the weather. And I think most of us are celebrating, exiting Pennsylvania.
I bet you are. Now, look, I normally start the interview with or the conversation rather, with a question from a listener, but I thought I'd end it this time because it's quite an interesting and fairly wide-ranging. It says, I have a question for Bruce. This is a guy called Steve Brock. It's about the number of people. It's about finances on the trail, and I've had it in a similar fashion from a number of people. He's not asking you how much you're spending. He's saying he's interested in how you're handling the financial aspects of the trip. Do you carry cash, credit card, ATM card? He said, I'm not sure how to ask this without him revealing too much personal information. Perhaps a general consensus as to how this is handled on the trail as far as he knows. I know most of the 20-somethings hardly ever use cash, but I would think that I would want to have some cash with me just in case if I was on the trail, he says. And he said, I have to believe there is hiker honour and that theft on the trail is non-existent. And certainly I found it to be non-existent myself. I presume the hotels and hostels all take credit card, as do the resupply locations like Walmart, dollar stores and visitor centres. How have you, I know you haven't worried so much about the spending thing, but how do you handle cash? What do you do with it?
Yeah, good question. I think probably my experience is similar to everyone else's, where outside the AT community, we're really quick to use credit and debit cards, and some people carry very, very little cash.
Yeah.
I am carrying I'm carrying a credit card and a backup credit card,
Yeah.
carrying an ATM card, and then I'm carrying cash.
Right.
You might be actually surprised a little bit by the number of businesses. May not be the listeners. There's a number of businesses along the trail that are, less than formal in many respects. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but shuttle drivers, some hostels, they get some very significant credit card fees if you pay for everything through a credit card.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's 2, 3, 4% for them.
That's right.
And so it would be very difficult to do this hike without cash.
Yeah.
There are shuttle drivers. There are lots of hostels. There are some sort of there's a number of vendors out there who really would prefer you to pay with cash. Yeah. And some short-term resupply. I don't mean a convenience store, but there are hostel type resupply opportunities where the hostel owners really would much rather handle cash than credit. Most of them will do a credit card, but a lot of them would prefer the cash.
Quite a few of them actually said that to me as well. Yeah.
And some will add a fee. If you say, look, I'm happy to use a credit card, but there's a 2.345 whatever fee, and they're just passing along the charge that the merchant account imposes on them to run a transaction through.
Yeah. So really, an ATM and cash is always a good thing to do. I agree with you. I said, what's the price? And they'll say it's $30 cash, or it's $30 plus, say $34, $35 if you want to use a credit card. And I carried a fair amount of cash with me, not tons, because of course that would be perhaps a silly thing to do. Are you hearing on the trail about how other people are experiencing the cost of things over here? Because this is a more expensive thing to do than most people realize, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, I guess there's a lot of different people in different places in their lives out here. And, $30 bunk at a hostel is expensive for some people and not for others.
Yeah.
My experience is that most people are handling things the same way I am. They might opt for a bunk in a hostel sometimes, where I have gone to a bed and breakfast, just as sort of a 60-year-old guy who's worked for 40 years. And I feel like this is, only time I'll probably do this. And I'm gonna enjoy my time here and there, where other people have to say, particularly younger ones might have to say, well, I can't afford to go into town and stay at the hostel this time. I'm going to have to just tent it another night or two. So it's a huge range of people. But I think everyone out here from time to time wants to go in town and has a particular pleasant lodging experience and or meal experience. And the real question is not whether or not people do that.
Yeah.
It's really the number of times they want to do it or can afford to do it.
Yeah, I thought about that quite a bit on my hike, because a lot of people gave a lot of the youngsters stick for doing a little bit of yellow blazing, missing a little bit of trail here, a little bit of trail there. I always thought hike your own hike was so important. If someone misses a few miles, right, it may not be a through hike in the strictest sense of the word, but frankly, even though I touched every mile, I'm sure that my hike was a whole lot easier than some of these youngsters' hikes, because I could spend more money on things than they could. I could go into town more often, and I could go into a hotel as opposed to a hostel, and all those things really seem to make my hike, and by the sound of things, your hike too, easier than some of the people who perhaps can't afford to do these things.
I would agree with that. I find that my time in town, particularly if I get a nice room in a B&B or something, it does help my R&R, and having good R&R means I've got a adjusted mental outlook and a strong emotional outlook. And we've talked a lot about this. Ultimately is about the mental, emotional aspect of how you're going to manage yourself up to Maine. And so I do think that people who have some level of financial stress it obviously adds into the mental aspect of their hike. I was with someone the other night who I've seen quite a bit since before Virginia, and she just quite simply said, "Well, things are going well. I just hope I don't run out of money before I get to Maine."
Yeah, sad.
She wasn't saying anything but, the way things were. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She wasn't looking for people to chip in and buy her something. It's just, and I've heard other people, sort of say that. So there is a wide range of ability out there, and at certain level, that ability can impact the success of the hike. I think primarily the way it impacts your mental edge to continue on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, that was an interesting question, Steve. And money is a really important thing. You can't ever overlook the amount of money you're going to need to do this sometimes. But good catch up, Bruce. We keep saying we're going to try to do 2 a week, but this seems to be just 1. I'd love to know your early impressions in the next couple of days of what you find in the rest of in New Jersey as you go forward. So if we can speak early next week, that'd be great. Otherwise, maybe it'll be another catch up next weekend. All right?
Yeah. Well, we'll try. Maybe we'll get to catch up before Monday.
Okay, mate. Well, appreciate it. I'll speak with you soon. Okay.
Very good.
Cheers.
Be well. Take care.
Bye. Steve Brock's question, or variations of that question, has been one that I've had several times, and as always, Bruce gave a considered answer. I know I've mentioned this before, perhaps on one of my other shows, but really, the cost of this trip is entirely dependent upon your needs and the availability of cash to meet those needs. The best image I can put into your head is one that I heard a while ago. Basically, on the day you set out on a through hike, if you lay out all of the gear you intend to take on a table, then put all the money you intend to spend alongside your gear, just take half the gear and twice the money. That'll do it for you. Oh, and by the way, Steve, please send me your address so that I can get a couple of yummy Trailtopia meals to you. I've got to tell you that when I did this hike, I'm not sure that I ever became as accomplished a hiker as Bruce unquestionably already is. In fact, and I speak with a lot of my guests away from the microphone, I still don't really consider myself a hiker, and nor do some of them. With my plans to hike for about 8 of 12 months from this October, I may change that assessment, but right now, I'm so impressed with what Bruce has learned and what he's prepared for. If you want a blueprint on how to successfully navigate the Appalachian Trail, then these podcasts and Bruce's calm demeanour and straightforward delivery will take you a long way down that path. So, he's out of Pennsylvania and continues to head north. Hopefully, I'll get an earlier impression of New Jersey from him soon. Until I do, Bruce and I will see you next week.